On March 15th, 2023, something happened that'll be in history books. Saudi Arabia agreed to sell its oil to China for yuan. Now, that might sound like just another trade deal, but it was an earthquake. It ended a 49-year-old system where oil, the lifeblood of the global economy, could only be bought with US dollars. That system was called the Petrodollar, and its monopoly just ended. This wasn't just about trade. It was a signal that the entire global monetary system is shifting. For the last 5 centuries, the world has seen a cycle of global reserve currencies: the Portuguese real, the Dutch guilder, the British pound sterling, and for the last 80 years, the US dollar. Each of these currencies followed a predictable pattern, an 8-stage life cycle. It starts with a rise to dominance, then overextension, and the rise of competitors. Cracks begin to show, and finally, replacement. According to this cycle, the US dollar has just entered stage 6. This is the most dangerous phase, where the privileges of being the world's money start to unravel. Think of it like a social network. The dollar became dominant because everyone else used it. This is called the network effect. But now, that effect is starting to flip. Countries are actively building a parallel universe, a financial system that doesn't rely on the dollar. The BRICS nations Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, now joined by others like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, are at the forefront of this movement. They're creating alternative payment systems, talking about a new gold-backed currency, and diversifying their reserves away from the dollar. And the numbers don't lie. In the year 2000, over 71% of all central bank reserves were held in US dollars. Today, that number has plummeted to just 58%, and it is projected to fall below 50% by 2030. Even more shocking is the dollar's role in trade. Just 2 years ago, in 2022, 73% of global trade was invoiced in dollars. By 2024, that figure has collapsed to 58%. This isn't a slow decline. It's an acceleration. Now, let's be clear. The dollar isn't going to disappear overnight. It won't become worthless. But it's on track to lose its crown as the undisputed king of currencies. It will become just one of several major reserve currencies in a multipolar world. And when that happens, the consequences for the United States will be immense. For 50 years, America has enjoyed what many call the exorbitant privilege. What does that mean? It means America could print money out of thin air and buy real goods and services from the rest of the world. We could run massive deficits because other countries had to buy our debt, our treasury bonds to get the dollars they needed for trade. This privilege gave the US for incredible advantages. First, forced demand for the dollar. Second, seigniorage, profit made from printing money. Third, the ability to borrow incredibly cheaply. And fourth, the power to export its inflation. When the Fed printed trillions, the inflation was spread out across the entire global economy. Losing reserve status means losing all 4 of these advantages. Suddenly, America will have to live within its means, based on its actual productivity. The pretend buy party will be over. All that inflation we exported will come rushing back home. And what about America's staggering $36 trillion national debt? Without the world being forced to buy our bonds, who will fund our deficit? To attract buyers, interest rates on our debt will have to skyrocket, potentially triggering a fiscal crisis of unimaginable proportions. The result? A painful adjustment. Some economists predict a drop in American living standards of 30 to 40%. T50-year free lunch funded by the Petrodollar system will finally end. If this sounds dramatic, it's because it is. But it's not without precedent. History shows us this exact pattern has repeated itself at least 3 times before. Portugal, the Netherlands, and Great Britain all went through the same cycle. They rose to economic dominance. Their currency became the world's reserve, and they enjoyed a golden age. But then came imperial overextension, costly wars, massive debt, and a decline in industrial competitiveness. In each case, the ruling power denied its decline, right up until the system collapsed. The United States is now mirroring the final years of the British Empire almost perfectly. Endless military engagements funded by massive borrowing, while industrial rivals catch up and overtake. The final straw. The strategic blunder that put this whole process into overdrive was the weaponization of the dollar itself. In 2022, after the conflict in Ukraine began, the US and its allies took the unprecedented step of freezing nearly $300 billion of Russia's foreign currency reserves. It was meant to be a show of ultimate power, but the message it sent to the rest of the world was terrifying. Your dollar reserves are not truly yours. They can be seized at a moment's notice if you fall out of line with Washington. That single act lit a fire under the global de-dollarization movement. Countries around the world, from China to Saudi Arabia to Brazil, realized they were dangerously exposed. They couldn't risk having their entire national savings held hostage. The race to find an alternative went from a marathon to a sprint. China and Russia, who had already been working on this for years, accelerated their efforts. They had already built their own payment systems, SIPs and SPFS. As alternatives to the Western-controlled SWIFT system, they began conducting more and more bilateral trade in their own currencies, completely bypassing the dollar. Then came the expansion of BRICS. The group added major energy producers like Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Suddenly, this wasn't just a political talking shop. It was an economic bloc that represented a huge chunk of the world's population, GDP, and, most importantly, its commodity production. This created a genuine counterweight to the G7 and the Western financial order. At the same time, we've witnessed a historic phenomenon. A global gold rush by central banks. From 2022 to 2024, central banks around the world bought gold at the fastest pace since the 1970s, the last time the global monetary system broke down. They aren't just buying gold for decoration. They are preparing for a world where the value of paper currencies, especially the dollar, is no longer guaranteed. Gold is the ultimate neutral reserve asset. It can't be printed, and it can't be seized by a foreign power. As these alternative systems solidify, the network effects that once favored the dollar are now flipping. Trade deals are being struck that explicitly exclude the dollar. India and the UAE are trading in rupees, and Brazil and China are trading in rials and yuan. Russia and Iran are settling accounts without a single dollar changing hands. When a major trading partner tells you they'd prefer to be paid in yuan instead of dollars, you start using yuan. As more partners switch, the incentive to stick with the old dollar system weakens for everyone. This brings us back to the 8-stage cycle. We are in stage 6, the beginning of the end. The next phase, stage 7, is the crisis trigger. This is the event that causes a sudden, widespread loss of confidence in the reserve currency. What could that trigger be? There are several possibilities on the horizon. It could be the official launch of a gold-backed BRICS currency, which would offer a credible alternative to the dollar. It could be a U.S. debt crisis, where the government finds it can no longer borrow enough money to pay its bills. It could be another major banking collapse, or even a multi-front military conflict that exposes America's overextension. When that trigger is pulled, history shows that the final collapse is rapid. Confidence is a fragile thing. Once it's gone, it's gone. We could see a global panic, a frantic dumping of US dollars and treasury bonds. The dollar could lose 30%, 40%, maybe even 50% of its value against other currencies and real assets like gold in a matter of months, not years. At that point, the US will face a no-win scenario. If the Federal Reserve raises interest rates high enough to defend the dollar and stop the inflation, it will crush the economy and trigger a deep recession. But if they keep printing money to bail out the government and the banks, they'll unleash hyperinflation. That's stage 7. And what follows is stage 8. The birth of a new monetary system. We don't know exactly what it will look like. It could be a world dominated by the Chinese yuan. It could be a new BRICS currency. Most likely, it will be a multipolar system with several currencies: the dollar, the euro, the yuan, and perhaps a commodity-backed currency all competing. What makes this transition so terrifying is its potential speed. In the past, these shifts took decades. When the British pound was replaced by the dollar, it was a slow grinding process over 30 years. But this time is different. Digital finance means trillions can move at the click of a button. The alternatives to the dollar already exist and are gaining traction. America's unprecedented level of debt makes it incredibly vulnerable. And our hyper-connected world means financial contagion can spread globally in an instant. So, Who are the winners and losers in this great transition? The winners will be those who prepared. Holders of real assets like gold, the BRICS countries, which have been positioning themselves for this shift for years. Commodity exporters who will be paid in currencies that hold their value. And nations with low debt. The losers will be those who are caught unprepared. The United States will be the biggest loser, as its era of exorbitant privilege comes to a close. Holders of US dollars and treasury bonds will see their savings evaporate. Nations with huge amounts of dollar-denominated debt will find it impossible to repay. And Wall Street and the US banking system, the primary beneficiaries of the dollar system, will face a historic reckoning. This isn't a prediction for next week or next month. This is a 10-year countdown. The dominoes are already falling. The question is no longer if, but when, and how chaotic the transition will be. The next decade will reshape the world we live in. Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis valuable, please like, subscribe, and share it to help others understand the monumental changes that are coming.